Hi, uh, my name is Nuno, and welcome to the Reform Review. This week we have a lot to cover. Last week we didn't get to really go over the news of the week because the US Citizenship Act of 2021 was introduced, and so we had to really dedicate last week's segment to discuss it and see really the details within it about who qualifies and who doesn't. If you didn't get a chance to catch that, if you're watching this not live and on YouTube, you'll see a recommendation somewhere on the screen for it. But regardless, let's get on to the program. So, again, we're going to start off with the immigration news of the week. And yeah, it's been a rather busy week. Quite a bit has happened, but I do want to take us back a little bit to really remembering a policy that was passed under the Trump administration back in August of 2019. This was called, it was a change to the public charge in regards to immigrants using public services. Now, if you remember this, or if you were yourself affected by it, this was a change where the Department of Homeland Security could classify someone as being likely a public charge. And if they did so, they would gain the grounds to deny that person entry into the United States or to deny them legal permanent resident status. So this is a very punishing change in policy, which was, I guess, iconic of the Trump administration. So what we're seeing now, actually, and this is again a reminder that on February 2nd, the the Biden administration said that they were reviewing the public charge rule from the Trump administration. From that point on, not much was discussed and not too much was showing up in the news aside from just the fact that it was still being implemented. This was this particular executive order from Biden, however, also mandated that the Secretary of State, the Attorney General, and the Secretary of Homeland Security would have 60 days from February 2nd to be able to detail and describe their next steps in addressing this policy. It is really just about reviewing it, nothing too substantive about actually taking some action to remove it. And so we should be hearing back their particular reports in around April, I would imagine. However, another kind of momentous occasion occurred this past week, which is, as it's saying down below, that on February 22nd, the U.S. Supreme Court finally agreed to hear this case because there was a lawsuit raised in New York against this particular public charge rule after it was extended, I believe, in the beginning of Biden's administration. So we are going to be waiting to see what's the final results of this particular public charge policy. If the U.S. Supreme Court rules that it is constitutional for the administration to have this kind of a policy in place, I'm not 100% sure what that will mean for immigrants going forward, if they'll continue to be punished or if Biden will be able to remove it through a different way. If it's found to be unconstitutional, then we won't have to worry. It'll be ruled down and this will no longer be an issue. But for the time being, the public charge policy is still in place. So do keep that in mind. And if you know anyone being affected by it, please tell them to hold off until we learn more about where this is going with the U.S. Supreme Court. And so that's really the first piece of the recap for this week, since it really kind of encapsulated bringing the Biden's administration's pathway to trying to undo much of the harm which Trump caused during his tenure as president. However, we still also are seeing some steps back right now during the Biden administration. It's very unfortunate, but this past week, so on February 22nd, President Biden reopened or in his case, I guess, opened his first child detention center of the administration. The interesting, I guess, in quotations here, is that this particular detention center is actually being reactivated from the Trump administration. So this is a center that Trump set up to handle overflow of undocumented immigrants crossing the border, and so now it's being repurposed to hold children, unaccompanied children, at the border. And this is actually a facility in Texas, in Carrizo, and so it'll be kind of just known that way going forward. And so in Carrizo, it is aiming to hold up to 700 children in ages 13 to 17. So it is a rather difficult situation, unfortunately. I'm going to pull up a quick, right here. Yeah. So this is just an article to kind of show what this is talking about. The Biden administration is trying to distance itself as much as possible from any comparisons to the Trump administration. You can see here Teresa Cardinal Brown, who was a former senior advisor on immigration in both the Bush and Obama administration, said that the comparisons to the Trump administration are unfair and not accurate. So although that they were built under the Trump administration, she says that that's where the similarities end. And this is actually an important piece right here I want to highlight, because this seems to be much of the argument being placed to really deflect criticisms of the Biden administration. I can also see my signal's a little bit weak, so very sorry for that, but I'll just continue on and I'm sure it'll reconnect. And so her reasoning for this is that it's not the same. That although these are children who are being detained, they are not in cages. And that's really the crux of the argument, is that if you remember the pictures that were shared during the Trump administration when he was separating families with his policies, there were pictures of kids in cages, and that really became the hallmark of his presidency and his immigration policy. Now, I have some issue with this particular line of argument just because it's not really too valid to use Trump and his practices as the standard or the baseline of what is to be considered humane. Of course, we can tell, especially from the way that we saw how his policies were affecting families during his time as president, that we really shouldn't be aiming to just do, to just one-up him. We should be aiming to actually create a system that is humane and fair to not only adult immigrants, but also to children, making sure that they're taken care of, especially since they are much more sensitive to this kind of a crisis and just a traumatic experience. Now, they also say that because the facility has educational services, it has medical care, that it is really acceptable. And I would argue that, well, probably not. Like, I can understand to an extent that it is necessary to avoid the spread of COVID because recently, and it's mentioned in this article and other articles, that the facilities had to cut their capacity by half in order to meet COVID procedures, which is fine because we are able to take care of the health of children to protect them from COVID. However, continuing to jail them and detain them is not the most humane approach out there. And also, this particular facility is concerning because they aim to hold children there for a maximum of 30 days. Now, the issue of that is that there is a law or policy in place that says that children cannot be detained for more than 20 days. So we're already breaking certain policies that are in place to protect the well-being of children. In addition, this is a secure facility. And what that means is that children are not allowed to leave the premises whatsoever out of their own volition. Uh, they're to be kept there at all times. And now, some people can argue that this is a good thing because it is in their best benefit, it's for their safety. But that isn't the point here, is that once you create this kind of a scenario where these children have no more freedom to leave, it is the equivalent of jailing them. They are being jailed and they're being held there, detained, despite them being the ones seeking asylum or relief. Now, the other argument here is that, well, it's only temporary. It's temporary until they are able to process them and then find them a suitable home. Completely understandable to an extent. Resources have been scarce and COVID has not helped at all in general with the systems that we have in place. Now, my only pushback on this is that there's other ways to do it aside from jailing children. This article, actually, there's another one here I can share that explains just how much the cost is because, as you can see here, yeah, it's a lot of children coming in. There's an influx at the border, which is very unfortunate. But the cost itself is also exorbitant. And I'm not saying this to say that we should prioritize then having more permanent detention centers. I don't believe that we should be detaining and jailing these children. What I'm saying is that the money spent on these emergency shelters, which I believe almost triples the cost of a permanent center, that could be used to help invest into the actual foster care system or the system in place that helps put children in a foster family to be cared for during their time that they're being processed. If that is possible, I believe that that's a much more not only efficient use to also help the foster care system, which is very weak in the US, but it also provides the opportunity for a more humane treatment of these children, sparing them from a rather traumatic experience where they are still being separated from family members and then being stuck in really what is essentially a jail. So no matter how pretty you disguise the jail cell, it's still a jail cell at the end of the day. And so I hope that the Biden administration can act on this quickly. They said that they are not planning on keeping this open for a long time. It is only for the time being. So that is something we need to hold him accountable to and make sure that that COVID does not become the blanket excuse for denying children and other immigrants their basic human rights. I also found the cost of these influx facilities. So to care for an individual child per day, it is $775. Again, compared to $290 at a permanent center. Again, not advocating to build more permanent centers. I don't believe in this whole detention scheme. But just to show how much money we could instead be investing into the foster care system and the placement system to help these children have a more humane processing system. But that is where I'll end this particular setback that we're experiencing, unfortunately, this past week, because we have another bad news. But I do promise in a little bit I'll go into sort of the hopeful good news that we've received this week. But just to get this one out the way, unfortunately, yeah, the 100-day deportation moratorium has finally been permanently suspended or banned. So this is very, very bad news because this was actually ruled back in January 26th, right? So a month ago is when this entire process began. U.S. District Judge Drew Tipton, who was a Trump appointee, he's the one who ruled to put a temporary restraining order, which was set to expire this week on February 23rd. There was a claim that the moratorium violated federal law on administrative procedure. and that the US government failed to show why a deportation pause was justified. Because of this, the Biden administration was not on the surface level able to stop the deportations during this 100-day moratorium. Now, on Tuesday, it was supposed to expire, but the day after, on February 24th, so Wednesday of this week, that is when the same judge delivered a final indefinite ban, meaning that this whole policy scheme of preventing deportations for 100 days is no longer in effect, and it couldn't even function. Now, on the surface level, this does seem like a defeat of the Biden administration, which I do agree, this is very awful. Hundreds of people have already been deported, including, actually, and this is very concerning, was let me see here, yeah, was a witness to the El Paso shooting. If you remember that, it was in the news quite some time ago in 2019. It left 22 people dead. And the worst part about this process is, as it says here, it's unclear, right? It's unclear how many of those people are considered national security or public security threats or had recently crossed the border illegally. And so people are being deported for really any reason. It even mentions that they can be expelled, which is a much quicker process using a public health order from the former President Donald Trump, which he invoked because of the COVID pandemic, and Biden has still not removed it. And so it's a combination of different pieces of federal judges who were appointed by Trump, but also the Biden administration not taking proactive action to remove certain policies that are allowing people to be expedited out of the country. Now, one thing that he could do is simply postpone a lot of these deportation hearings or proceedings by 100 days as a way to kind of circumvent the fact that he couldn't have a moratorium overall. So just rescheduling the hearings. This will give them time to really figure out immigration policy reform and implement some changes to then provide support and help. But we're not seeing that right now, and I don't believe there's much conversation within the White House on this. So that is very unfortunate. And again, we have to keep close attention and very much think critically about this and not take it on the surface level. We shouldn't allow the Biden administration to get away with this by just using the excuse that he was prevented by a Trump appointee, that it's the conservatives' fault. He has the power to make changes to help these immigrants who are in need, to prevent them from being removed from this country for arbitrary reasons, and to get them due process in a just and humane manner. His choice not to do that is the issue, not so much the procedures in place at the moment. Hopefully this gets resolved. Again, we're not going to see this deportation moratorium any longer because it is now banned indefinitely, but just to really walk you through that process. That was the unfortunate news of this week. Again, that the Biden administration opened the child detention center and, of course, this decision on the moratorium. However, I will kind of not make this all depressing, and we're going to kind of talk about more of the, hopeful future of what's happened this weekend, even a little bit beforehand. Again, we didn't get to cover the immigration news of the week last week because we discussed the USCA. So I do want to start off with this news back from February 13th, when the Biden administration began the process of dismantling the Remain in Mexico asylum policy. If you're not too familiar with this, it is a process. Let's see if I can find it here. Yeah, here we go. This is a policy that was passed under the Trump administration, and it required asylum seekers to remain, again, as the name really clearly implies, in Mexico while their asylum petition is being processed. This is especially for immigrants coming from Central America seeking aid in the US, and so they would be forced to stay in Mexico. Now, immediately you can see the issues with this is that the US has more of a capacity to protect asylum seekers, and it is the responsibility of the country that is being applied to. And the fact that these asylum seekers are remaining in a country where they may face persecution, they may face violence, and the fact that it was forcing tens of thousands of non-Mexican asylum seekers back over the border. When you move at least 70,000 people into one camp, you have a humanitarian crisis. And so this is what we saw, is that people were moved in mass and waiting for ridiculous lengths of time. And it just made no sense whatever to put these people in so much harm. Now, what happened on February 13th is that the Biden administration instructed the Department of Homeland Security to begin phase 1 of their review and to remove the policy beginning on February 19th, so 6 days after. So since the 19th, so little below a week ago, the DHS, so the Department of Homeland Security, has been working to pull back this policy and to begin the process of reviewing applications once more to bring asylum seekers into the U.S. while they're being processed and to provide them that protection. So this is, again, very good news to prevent another humanitarian crisis. We do not want to keep doing this over time, but we do want to, again, pay attention, think critically about it, and make sure to hold people accountable. If we do not see this proceeding over time within the next few months, we need to start asking questions of the Biden administration to make sure that the DHS is following through with this and making sure that asylum seekers are brought into the U.S. to seek asylum. And so that is the first piece. Again, a little bit hopeful news, but we do have another one, which is, I think, an amazing thing for especially people who have family members going through the immigrant visa process. You'll see it kind of running down the bottom there. It's very lengthy, but very important to know that on February 24th, so very recently, so just 3 days ago, Biden signed a executive order which revoked Proclamation 10014, Section 1 of Proclamation 10052, and Section 1 of Proclamation 10131. For those of you not familiar with what all those numbers mean, this, especially Proclamation 10014, was an executive order from Donald Trump which banned the entry of all immigrant visas, including those seeking permanent residency based on family, employment status, or even the diversity visas. So these were people who were already going through the process and just had to come to the U.S. to go through it, but they were denied entry to the U.S. And so their process was put on hold using COVID as not an excuse, but basically justification is an excuse. So now, thankfully, again, on February 24th, those immigrants who are being processed for their immigrant visas are allowed to come back or come to the U.S. Of course, there are still some COVID-related travel restrictions that could affect those coming, but it is at least finally allowed. Again, there's always, I feel like this will be the hallmark of this show. There is always the good, but then there's the shadow of bad kind of looming in the background. Now, it's great that President Biden did rescind Proclamation 10014. However, the ban on temporary non-immigrant visas is still in effect, so they aren't allowed to come into the country still. So we do have some organizations working to pressure the Biden administration to revoke that piece as well, but we are still waiting to see what comes about it. And of course, as always, I will keep you updated in this weekly segment of where this is going over time. Now, the other concern to be had is to remember the importance that, well, you know, this immigration reform has to happen now. Uh, and to remember that the Trump administration severely damaged an already broken system. So many of Biden's executive orders so far are only working to undo Trump's harm. This is almost as if it's taking us back to the Obama era uh, of an immigration system. But you had to remember that that Obama era immigration system did not work in our favor or in the favor of the immigrant community. It still had many issues with it and had many deportations during that time. So we have to remember to demand more from our representatives and to do it now. The next midterm elections will be in November of 2022. This means that we're very limited on time to make sure that we push as much reform through right now. Uh, if you're not familiar with what happens in politics, politicians will become way more sensitive to immigration uh, as we approach an election cycle because they want to appeal to more conservative voters. Now, this isn't all representatives. Those who really hold themselves to be a progressive will stay firm in their view of immigration and even lean into it as a point to vote for them. However, this is more of an issue with moderate Democrats and Republicans, those who say that they want to reach to the other side of the aisle. Now, that's always a fine idea, but you have to remember that bipartisanship is kind of a myth and during this time. For the past decades, we've not been able to have much of a bipartisan relationship anymore in the US Congress. It's really been cutthroat back and forth between the two parties. And so the reason why I bring this up is that it's very important when we're looking at the current reforms for consideration, whether it's the US Citizenship Act or even the DREAM Act, it really hinges on bipartisan support. And if that doesn't exist and people are going to be way more sensitive to immigration, well, we have to act now and catch as many people as we can onto our side. All right, we cannot rely on Biden's executive orders to provide relief. You have to remember a couple of things. When Obama passed, he couldn't pass immigration reform as a bill through Congress, and so he tried with an executive order with DACA. And while that was successful, you have to remember the flip side story of DAPA, right? The Deferred Action for Parents of American Citizens or Americans. And the fact that DAPA was unsuccessful because we broke up reform into different pieces and tried to push it through executive action. And the result was that DAPA was blocked by the U.S. Supreme Court due to a tie, right? Justice Scalia died during that time and left it as equal conservative and progressive judges. Now times have changed, and we do not see that same makeup of the U.S. Supreme Court, and so it makes it even more difficult. So we do need to act now. We have to make sure that that the reform we do now is not dependent on who is in office, especially at the level of president. Trump promised he would make sure to protect DACA recipients and dreamers, and yet one of the first things he did going forward was really weaken DACA and really threaten it going forward. So, with that in mind, I think we'll move on to really the final piece of the program, which is about how can you actually take action going forward. This will be an evolving report over time. As we make more contact with different organizations, I'll be able to direct you to those organizations so you can get involved with them as well. I think that joining an organization that's local to you or within the states is a good way to familiarize yourself with the struggle, with the campaign and push, while also being with like-minded people who are willing to get out there and work for something big. And actually, I take that back. We're going to first talk about, to give you an update on the reforms, because that's kind of important to know where it stands right now to know what you're going to do. So yeah, we'll do that one first, and then we'll talk about actions after. So the first one I'll talk about is really, of course, the the crux of this campaign, which is the U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021. I'll have some information running on the bottom, not too much, because there's not much that has happened with this. If you remember, it was formally introduced in the House of Representatives on February 18th. So that's when we were able to read the bill. And if you were here last week, you were able to join me as I kind of read through the eligibility requirements and who was eligible, who wasn't, and other considerations for the pathways to citizenship. If, again, you'll see a recommendation if you're seeing this after we finish the live session and it's archived. So you'll see it somewhere on the screen. Now, the update on this for this past week is that the Senate version was finally submitted on February 22nd. If you remember, for some reason, I'm not 100% sure. I'm sure if I find a video somewhere, I'll get this reason, but I have no idea why the Senate version was held off for an extra 4 days. But it was finally submitted this week on the 22nd. So now we have both bills in both chambers of Congress, which means now it can proceed to committee roles and then hopefully to eventually get to a floor vote. So this is why it's very important for us to be doing what we're doing now, building support, calling representatives, and getting out there. But in terms of an update for this in particular, it's been gaining more Democratic support. We expect that the sufficient majority of the Democrats in the House of Representatives will be supporting this. We may be a little bit finicky on a couple of them, but it shouldn't be enough to put it at jeopardy in the House. Now, the issue, again, remains in the Senate, and not much has been done in terms of movement to support from Republican senators. We're still stuck in this 50-50 deadlock, which is an issue because through the normal channels, which is to, again, introduce it as this act and push it through, to avoid a filibuster, which would either extend the process too long or just kill a bill completely, you need 60 votes. So that means we need at least 10 Republican senators to flip and support the bill. The issue is that many Republican representatives are likely to urge for a specific focus of who would get aid, who wouldn't, and to include more increased border enforcement. I believe we already have enough resources going to the border, maybe too much in my opinion, especially when it comes to detention. So this is going to be an issue going forward, whether or not Democrats will fold and concede to give some kind of concessions as they have in the past. This is familiar to the 1986 amnesty back under a Republican president, where we received some help, but then on the flip side, more enforcement and more punishment to immigrants in the country. So not really something we want to be doing going forward. We really want to be bold and progressive and make sure that we're helping the people who need help, not punishing those around them. So we are going to see what this goes to. We still have top leaders and administrators who are saying that the best step forward would be to either try and pass it as a one bill, or again, a piecemeal approach, which is to break it apart and then send those different measures to Congress and see what sticks, really. But aside from the usual criticisms from Republican members and other conservative commentators, not too much has really been done so far with this, which is unfortunate, aside from maybe some town hall meetings from representatives who already support it. So that's really the update on this particular reform. But now I do want to take it back slightly to mention the DREAM Act, because as a reminder, it was introduced on February 4th, so quite some time ago now, it's almost a month, by Senator Dick Durbin, who was a Democrat, is a Democrat from Illinois, and in tandem with Senator Lindsey Graham, who's actually a Republican from South Carolina. You may know him as a very strong supporter of former President Trump. So this is very surprising, but not too surprising because I believe he supported this kind of a bill in the past. Now, compared to the U.S. Citizenship Act, this is actually enjoying quite a bit of bipartisan support. Again, we have a Democratic senator and Republican senator who introduced it. But in general, it's also because a large majority of Americans already support this. Uh, there's a survey from the Pew Research Center, and it found that 74% of Americans support granting legal status to immigrants who are brought to the U.S. Illegally as children. And so when you have this overwhelming support, it makes sense that it becomes bipartisan because both Republicans and Democrats are willing to support it. Well, when you look at the numbers, it gets a little bit more, again, divided by party line. For Democrats, it is 91% who support this, only 8% oppose. On the Republican side, it is now the majority, so 54% actually support this kind of a pathway for Dreamers, while 43% oppose it. So very polarized, but it is now turning in the benefit of the Dreamers, even on the Republican side. So that is something optimistic to look forward to. Now, the only real relevant news I kind of picked up on was that there was the Immigrant Partnership and Coalition Fund, which held a virtual summit on February 25th of 2021, so literally 2 days ago. And this was really just help build support around the bill, more so bipartisan support, because actually the panelists included former Senator Mel Martinez, which is a Republican from Florida, but also from Florida, Representative Mario Diaz-Balart. He's also a Republican from Florida. He's currently a U.S. congressional representative. And it also included former Florida Governor Jeb Bush. You may remember him from his unsuccessful presidential bid against former President Trump. And so you had a rather, again, bipartisan panel and attendance to this. So hopefully what we see coming out of this is continued support, and that at least the DREAM Act can be passed to help Dreamers who are already in this country and already receiving aid from the federal government. And this would just be the final step to grant them permanent residency. So that is, again, really the overview of the reforms that we're keeping an eye on. I think these will be the two that we will be monitoring going forward. I'll always give you an update if there's another pathway or reform in the works. But for now, it seems that these two are the main ones to go forward. And now, now we'll actually talk about the action report, how you can get involved, how you can take action right now to make a change and to build support for these reforms, whether you prefer the comprehensive reform through the USCA, or if you're more of an advocate for the DREAM Act, because either it's something that personally affects you or you know someone who's affected by it. And right away, I can tell you that the easiest, most straightforward way is to sign and share the petition that's associated with this campaign. So far, and last I checked, we are very close to hitting 5,700 signatures. So we are doing an amazing job, and we've grown quite a bit over this past week, over 500 signatures. So very, very amazing job. But again, this is very much the basic way that you can take action right now. It's just, if you haven't already, sign it and then share it with your friends and family or people that you know, and just really promote this. This is our way of being able to call our representatives and tell them, hey, this many people are supporting it already, you should too. And so that's really what this petition is for, and to just, again, build momentum behind this and get it in the ears of our representatives that we are building support for these reforms. Now, another way that you can get involved, which is a little bit more personal, so this is definitely up to you if you feel comfortable with it, is to share your story with us. Stories are powerful, right? And they can help build momentum and help us connect with others. A big part of why DACA was successful was the fact that these were that American citizens, other Americans, were able to connect with them on a personal level. They shared that a lot of Dreamers were able to share their stories across different media outlets and explain why they should be given an opportunity to live here and have the chance to succeed. And so similarly, we want to do something similar for the USCA. We want to recognize that these are everyday people. These are your friends, family members, neighbors, coworkers, or someone who's even saving your life in a hospital. We need to be able to show and humanize the immigration process to make sure that we recognize that people who are going through this are human beings and they deserve dignity and respect. And this is one way that you can do it. If you have a story of your experience with the immigration system or why you want immigration reform to happen, please share it. It'll mean a lot. And again, hashtags are scrolling across the bottom, but just in case, Citizenship 2021, that's the campaign's hashtag, USCA 21, immigration reform, or of course, you can tag the show Reform Review, and we'll be happy to share it along. Now, that is a more personal way to do it, but if you want to get even more involved, what you can do is, of course, call or email your U.S. representatives, starting with the federal level, which would be preferred just so we can start building the support that's necessary to actually get the bill passed. But you can definitely reach out to your state and local representatives to draft resolutions in support of this act. And the best way that you can kind of find out how you can do this, if you're not already experienced at calling or reaching out to your representative, check out our campaign website. It's scrolling across the bottom, but citizenship2021.org/action. If you go directly to that link, you'll be able to access our step-by-step guide of how do you actually find out who your representative is, how do you get their contact details, and then we also give you a script, suggested message to send or to say on the phone with your representative. Now, this is very important because although they may not answer you directly and you're sent to a answering machine or whatever the method is for certain representatives, they have to log it. And that's the important part, is that they are logging these calls, keeping track of how many people are calling, what the issue is, and whether they support it or are against it. And this is what we need to do. We have to flood these phones and make sure that they know that we're watching, that we want this, and it has to be done now. Again, we're working on a very tight schedule. We have to get this done before the next midterm election. So the more we do now, the more we call, the more we push, the easier this process will be in the future. Now, this is going to be a more of my own personal petition to those who are watching, is that you can also support the campaign itself. So Citizenship 2021, which is the sort of umbrella of the Reform Review, which is what I run here. The reason why is that, well, I'm a one-man team, which is fortunate because I do love this work, but also unfortunate because it does take a lot of time and resources, which are limited when it's just yourself handling so much. I pay for everything out of pocket just because it's something I'm passionate about, and I don't mind spending money if it means helping other people. But at the same time, it is overwhelming to an extent because there's just so much work that needs to be done. Aside from running this particular show to keep everyone updated and educated on how they can take action, and just in general with news, since so much is happening, we also have the website, we have social media accounts, we have the petition that needs to go out, we have to keep on calling, and we have to organize actions to make sure we can all come together and do a collective action which raises more attention and momentum than just us alone. And so there's quite a bit of work to be done. So I did divide it up into 3 different things that are scrolling across the bottom. But one, if you want to help with the Citizenship 2021 campaign in general, that'd be great. We have a need for people who can do some research with us, who can help with social media in terms of promotional materials, reaching out to different organizations to see if they're willing to partner up and have a more united front. So that kind of work would be helping the campaign itself. So if that's your cup of tea or any other kind of way that you want to say it, definitely reach out. Again, the email is right there, citizenshipact2021@gmail.com. I'll see it right away and I'll respond and we'll see what we can work out. Equally important, if you want to help with this series, right, the Reform Review, I would definitely appreciate that as well. Aside from doing this live weekly session, we also are going to start a new series, which I'll mention a little bit more later. But these would be standalone videos, which would help educate the general community about the ongoing reform attempts, but also different immigration news happening, right? So it's not going to be just a weekly thing, because that's the issue, is that it also takes quite a bit of work to record it all, to edit it all, mix all the audio, and get it all prepped and ready to be uploaded. So if you want to help with the reform review, whether it is with this live session or with the more detailed standalone videos, again, Citizenship Act 2021 at gmail.com. And lastly, in a little bit less of a commitment, is if you want to just help with promoting the campaign to outlets. It's as simple as taking our petition, taking our website, and reaching out to either a journalist, to a traditional television media site, and just telling them, hey, I really like what this campaign is doing. They're getting a lot of support. Again, we have over 5,600 signatures. So if that can be done, definitely do it. Reach out again to this email if you plan on doing that, just so we're aware, and share this email if you do go that route, so that way we can also be contacted by the journalists to then promote the campaign. That would be an immense help. It's something that I do myself, trying to reach out and get something going. So if anyone can help with that, that'd be amazing. And again, just send an email over, let me know, and we can go from there. So with that out the way, right, those are the different ways that you can help. I do want to mention the last piece, which I slightly mentioned earlier, but we are starting a new series. This one is going to be Immigration Reform Review. It'll be a playlist on this channel. If you're watching through YouTube, you can simply find it by going to our channel and you'll see it there. And it might be a recommendation later when this is done and I come back to it and I edit it in. So if you're interested in learning more about actual reform and getting details and historical information and more specific details than what I can cover in a sit down of a live session, definitely go that way. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, because we'll be able to keep on, you'll receive the notifications that you need when we post, and we're going to try to do it regularly. I'm not going to make any promises, because again, there's quite a bit of work that has to be done right now with everything, the campaign, and other responsibilities I have. But do expect that those videos will come out, and I'll try and make them as high quality as I can. I try and take pride in that work. So definitely look out for that. And if you're already on YouTube watching this, please make sure just to hit subscribe, and we'll get you those notifications on what's coming up. But with that out the way, that's really the reform review for this week, and I thank you for joining, whether you're seeing this live or joining us after the fact, archived in YouTube. Regardless, I appreciate all the support, and thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you next week or in one of the videos suggested on the side here when this is up on YouTube. So thank you and take care. All right.